Welcome everyone to Geopolitics Upside Down. It's the 9th of March, about 6 p.m. Australian time, and this is a podcast about the emergence of the multipolar world, particularly as it's manifesting in the crisis in Ukraine. I'm Jeff Rich. I'm a writer, podcaster, and minor government official, and none of what I have to say has anything at all to do with my role in one of the provincial governments in Australia, so just so we're all clear on that. I was planning to do a situation report sort of episode against the four vectors that I've been describing in these podcasts of information war, military war, economic war and diplomatic war, but there clearly have been significant developments in recent days. The humanitarian situation for some of the cities seems quite dire, but I do see reports this afternoon that at least a more significant number of people seem to be able to exit Mariupol, and there are some signs that the Zelensky regime may capitulate. But unfortunately, there are also signs that the capacity of the nominal Ukrainian government to actually control the on-the-ground military operations in the key cities in the south and the east, where the extreme nationalist brigades are involved, seems to be limited. So hopefully someone is going to step up and act sensibly. And the whole economic situation is just careening out of control, but that will require further discussion in another episode. So today what I wanted to focus on, though, is these dramatic developments over the last couple of days, particularly really over the last 24 hours, which seem to indicate that there are US-supported or US-operated, US and Ukraine-operated biolabs, potentially bioweapon labs in Ukraine that, in effect, the US and the Ukraine may have been in contravention of the Convention on Chemical and Biological Weapons. In brief, if you like, the United States famously shook a little vial of something, the UN Security Council, to accuse Saddam Hussein of preparing weapons of mass destruction. It appears, at least this is the allegation, that does appear to be documented and have some substantial evidence behind it. It appears that Tony Blinken should have been exposing some of this evidence about US and Ukrainian involvement at the UN Security Council in recent times, rather than accusing Russia of false flags, actually admitting guilt on the part of America and the American supportive regime in Kiev. Okay, so what's happened? So a couple of days ago, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that it had uncovered evidence in the course of its taking over territory in key cities and key parts of Ukraine, uncovered evidence of both the biolabs that America and Ukraine were operating, as well as evidence of the destruction of some of the pathogens, a wide range of pathogens, including like anthrax and the plague and other sorts of pathogens, and also evidence of the destruction of evidence. And this is quite significant. It was not particularly taken up in the media. I guess it was seen as just more Russian propaganda, more Russian disinformation. And but the existence of these biolabs is no secret. Indeed, on the 25th of February, in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, a US official, Robert Pope, who's the director of the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, expressed concern about the invasion of Ukraine putting at risk a network of US-linked labs in Ukraine. The article was at pains to emphasise they were not bioweapons facilities, but that, I guess, will need to be investigated perhaps. So no secret, and indeed these labs go back all the way back to 2010, so a dozen years, couple of years after the initial Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and no less than Senator Barack Obama was intimately involved, it seems, in helping set up these biolabs. So no dispute about their existence, no dispute about the involvement of America and American contractors, some differences of view about, I guess, what their purpose is and all that kind of thing. And in addition, it was actually reported by a Bulgarian journalist that the US Defense Department actually took down on February the 26th, 2 days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine commenced. The US Department of Defense took down all its public web pages about these biolabs. Why does America have biolabs in other countries? Well, it appears it has over 300 biolabs in other countries, not quite as many as the number of military bases it has, about 800. And this extensive suite of biolabs may well have some good and legitimate purposes, but also appears to be justified, including by people like Anthony Fauci, who sponsors much of the research in this area, as enabling America to conduct risky biological research in countries with less tight regulation, with lower costs, and exposing Americans to less risk of hazardous material, accident, all the rest of it. And of course, we may remember that the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been investigated quite significantly as to whether that was in fact, which was also funded by the Americans, whether that was the source of the coronavirus leak. So background there around this big biolabs program that America has in, of all places, Ukraine, right on Russia's borders. Quite a large number of biolabs, like 30 plus in Ukraine, and they've only got 300 worldwide, and I think it's about 30 countries, so 3 times the average of the average country. I mean, I guess Ukraine's a big agricultural country, it's a big country, that might explain it, but it is also interesting that it's on the borders of America's enemy. Now, as I said, this hasn't been widely picked up as a story. It's been seen as disinformation and conspiracy theories and all that sort of stuff. So something has happened in the last 24 hours that has rather changed people's perception of the issue. And that something is that the Deputy Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, appeared before, I think it was the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and she dropped a bombshell. Now, Victoria Nuland, just a bit of background here. If you don't know, Victoria Nuland has had a long involvement in American diplomacy, foreign policy. She's worked for, I think, both Hillary Clinton and George Bush. And indeed, she worked for Dick Cheney, no less, and is renowned as, I think there was a foreign policy profile of her as the undiplomatic diplomat, fond of F-words, fond of brusque and demanding attitudes, rather fond of an aggressive neoconservative advocacy of American supremacy all around the world. And she is an ardent Russophobe. I'm not entirely sure why, but she's seen to be, together with her husband, who also works for the Secretary of State, Robert Kagan, one of the proponents of the Iraq war and the whole Iraq weapons of mass destruction hoax. She and Anthony Blinken, she's seen as an ardent Russophobe and very, very pro-Ukraine in its current political manifestation. And she indeed was at the centre of the events of 2014 that are described by some as the Maidan Revolution, or the Revolution of Dignity, I think some people describe it as, and certainly by Russians and quite a few other observers, including even like people like Steve Bannon, the sort of right-wing nationalist, sort of American, but also quite, I mean, he is nationalist American, as a US-engineered coup. A democratically elected government was deposed on the basis of physical violence at events and then various other activities. You can check out background on that if you want to. Nuland was, filmed, photographed at handing out cookies, of all things, with true American diplomatic style and panache during the events in Maidan Square. And famously, she was also taped, or a phone conversation that she had with the US ambassador to Ukraine, a man called Jeffrey Pyatt, who's something of a specialist in colour revolutions, regime change operations. She was actually taped having a very interesting conversation. Two American diplomats, two foreigners, discussing the domestic political situation in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to play that whole tape here for you now. It's about 4 minutes.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Klitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got. He's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, okay. I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it and, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we can probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks.
So some of the people, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, are discussing there extreme nationalists, some of them or members of the kind of right sector and other kind of groups in Ukraine. The man Klitschko referred to is one of those nationalists and is in fact the current mayor of Kiev, who's done a few media interviews as part of the current events. And when you hear the US talk about sovereignty and independence and Russia interfering in elections and Ukraine being a democracy, just remember the nature of that conversation to foreign diplomats conspiring together as to who should and shouldn't be forming the Ukrainian government. And also just remember that the main party that was removed from office as a result of this scheming by Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt and indeed Joe Biden was subsequently banned in Ukraine. Such is the quality of Ukrainian democracy. Okay, so that's a lot of background, but it's really important background. Now, Victoria Nuland appeared today at and I guess some of you might know about all that background. I apologise if I've sort of gone over old ground for you, but a lot of people who are coming to this whole story perhaps are fresh or just new and just had a shock that how could there be an invasion of a European democracy like Ukraine. It's important to recall these events and these individuals who are central to these events because it's simply inexplicable. It's part of the whole unresolved Cold War between the United States and Russia, that there's been a kind of a proxy war going on within Ukrainian domestic politics for a couple of decades, and very, very active involvement of America within the internal domestic political arrangements of Ukraine. So what happened today? Well, Victoria Nuland gave testimony to the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm just going to play one key question that she's asked by Senator Marco Rubio about this whole question about biolabs or bioweapons in Ukraine.
Well, I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Well, she could have just said no, couldn't she? Does Ukraine have bioweapons? No, they don't have bioweapons. Instead, and if you look at the actual video of that, if you follow this podcast up and actually look at the video, you can see both she's awkward and uncomfortable in answering the question, very delicately sort of trying to walk a tightrope, as well as the fact that after Senator Rubio says, enough, I'm going to save you here and say, if there's a false flag event, it's clearly Russia's fault, isn't it? Oh, yes. There's a sort of a big relieved smile on Victoria Nuland's face afterwards. So I think she might have sort of, whether consciously or not consciously, or just aware that the evidence was going to be coming out anyhow, we've had a big revelation here. And it's really, it's sent shockwaves, I think, throughout the American scene, because just as a bit of a signal for the range of opinion, there's been quite a negative reaction from some of the American media to it. A lot of the American media, of course, are just covering it up. I can only assume that she made that statement because she knew Russia had evidence, and she had to sort of let a little bit of the information come out to get ahead of the story. And indeed, Russia has, just in the last couple of hours, I believe, actually released documents which seem to confirm their statements about what was going on, and also that the Ukrainian authorities, on the US instigation, set about destroying the evidence of this bioweapons lab or bioweapons bio research lab that might be a bioweapons lab. And it's important to note that destroying evidence of such a program is defined as a war crime in one of the appropriate convention of international law against chemical and biological weapons. Conveniently, of course, America is not a signatory. It's probably ratified, but it's probably said it supports, but hasn't actually ratified and been a real signatory to that convention. So it will slip out of that one. So huge events. And China has already made a statement on this situation. And I'll just play that statement for you now too.
Over the past 2 decades, the United States has been blocking the establishment of a verification regime to the Biological Weapons Convention and refused to accept the inspection of biological facilities within and outside its borders. The move has further aggravated the concern of the international community. We once again urge the US to provide full clarification of its biomilitarization activities within and outside its borders and accept multilateral verification.
And remember, of course, more under the Trump regime than the Biden regime, there's a lot of hoo-ha about investigating whether the Wuhan lab was the source of the coronavirus and whether there was any activity inconsistent with the prohibition on biological and chemical weapons underway in China. And the Australian Prime Minister, I believe, got China's nose out of joint by advocating an independent inquiry into that matter, which I think is probably a legitimate request. But China has, I think probably appropriately and with some moral justification, there said that this is perhaps much more substantial evidence of a potential breach of that convention, and certainly it needs to be investigated. And then similarly, the Russian ambassador to the United States has said, and I'm just here quoting, I think from the Telegram channel from Kremlin, because it's hard to actually get the Kremlin website up because of the cyber war that is underway against Russian websites. So the ambassador is asked to comment on Victoria Nuland's statement on the possible transition of biological labs on the territory of Ukraine under control of the Russian armed forces. Now, this is a translation, so forgive any poor translation. And Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador to the US, says the entire network of biological labs was created on the Ukrainian territory. It includes more than 30 facilities. The contracting authority of the works carried out there is the US Department of Defense. It is the Department of Defense affiliated contractor Black & Veatch that takes part in realization of these projects. During the special military operation in Ukraine, the Russian armed forces discovered multiple facts of an urgent cleanup of traces of the military biological program carried out by the Kiev regime. The Russian side possesses information on the elimination of some of the most virulent pathogens of plague, anthrax, tularemia, cholera, and other deadly diseases. Allegations of the State Department's representatives show that the USA is afraid that these dangerous pathogens stored at the above-mentioned facilities will get into the hands of Russian experts. In this case, the violation by Ukraine and the United States of the Convention on the Prohibition of Biological and Toxic Weapons will be confirmed. It makes you wonder, whether that's chemical weapons. That might be a strange thing in the machine translation. It makes you wonder how Washington will react to today's accusations from the PRC, the People's Republic of China, that the Pentagon has deployed 336 biological laboratories in 30 countries. Why are these objects created abroad? We are waiting for an honest and direct answer. We've already seen some mainstream media outlets say that it's irresponsible to make and repeat such claims. But only last week, of course, like the front page of the Australian in Australia was reporting the headline, "The End of Europe?" in response to what proved to be a incorrectly reported story about an incident at the Zaporozhye, maybe, a nuclear facility in eastern Ukraine. I think these events are going to be decisive. Effectively, they undercut American diplomacy dramatically. They call into question the moral and strategic sense of both the American and the Ukrainian leadership, and they further, strengthen the close relationship between Russia and China, and they open up a whole new front on the diplomatic war. So we shall see how they develop. I also just might add quickly that there's been a smaller incident where America kind of proposed in the media to Poland that they should send their fighter jets to Ukraine, and that America would top them up, and that Poland would send the jets to Ukraine so as to enable Ukraine to implement a no-fly zone in Ukraine, which would be an act of war against Russia. And so America was brave enough to suggest that Poland do its dirty work for it in provoking World War III. Poland responded by saying, well, I tell you what, we will send our fighter jets to your military Air Force base in Germany, and then you can take it from there. And they put that out there. They put that out there in the media just before Miss Victoria Nuland appeared before the Committee of Foreign Relations, and they didn't actually tell America that either. So there does And subsequently, the Pentagon and the US seem to have backtracked from the whole idea of, using the Polish Air Force as some sort of Trojan horse to start World War III against Russia. So it has not been a great 48 hours in American diplomacy. There have been some very significant revelations, very concerning revelations that will clearly need to be investigated and assessed carefully, but that I think rather undermine the sense this is a fight of good versus evil, or democracy versus autocracy. Some rather darker forces are at play on the part of America and Ukraine. Okay, so I'm going to finish up this podcast there. I hope you found that interesting and informative. Do be really careful interpreting information, and please do not succumb to the sort of wave of Russophobia that is affecting Western societies at the moment. Do stay sane, and remember, what thou lovest well will not be reft from thee. And I'll be back with another Geopolitics Upside Down in a couple of days.